No one in America knew what was happening that night in the frozen mountains of Korea, while families back home slept peacefully, believing their sons were safe. A 19-year-old soldier named Private John Miller crouched in the snow, his trembling hands clutching both a rifle and a half-finished letter to his mother. It was supposed to be a simple note, just a promise that he was fine, that he would come home soon. But the truth pressing against his heart was too heavy for reassurance, and his words carried a weight far greater than he realized. Every sentence he scribbled under the dim glow of a flickering lantern was a battle of its own. Hope against despair, life against death. And yet as he wrote those fragile words, John had no way of knowing that the letter would become the only trace of his voice left behind, as that the world would one day discover its chilling secret, the cold reality. The Korean winter was merciless. Snow clung to every surface, freezing boots to the ground and biting through layers of wool. John shivered as he pressed the paper against his knee, the ink stiffening in the bitter wind. Around him his unit huddled in silence. The laughter that had once filled their campfires was gone, replaced by a suffocating quiet. They were waiting for orders, for dawn, for the next wave of enemy soldiers. John stole glances at the men beside him. Some prayed, some sharpened bayonets, some simply stared into the distance, their eyes hollow as if already lost. But John was different. He still believed the letter in his pocket mattered, that if he could just finish it, he would anchor himself to life, to home, to something beyond the cold valley of war. But the most haunting part of his message had not yet been written. Words between bullets, John wrote slowly, his fingers numb. "Dear Mom, I don't know how to tell you what it's really like out here. The nights are colder than anything we ever felt in Indiana. Sometimes I think even my heart is freezing. But I keep moving because I promised you I'd come home. And I will somehow." He paused, his breath fogging the page. A gunshot cracked in the distance, snapping every soldier to attention. Rifles raised, eyes searched the dark hills. After a tense silence, the sound faded. No attack came. Still, John's hand shook as he bent back to his letter. "You'd be proud of me, Mom. I try to be brave like Dad taught me. But sometimes bravery just feels like pretending. Pretending I'm not scared. Pretending I don't hear the whispers in the night. Pretending that tomorrow will come." Suspicion in the camp later that night. The unit gathered around their commander for whispered orders. John caught fragments of the conversation. "Encircled, cut off, why don't we hold until dawn?" His stomach twisted. The men returned to their posts. John sat with his closest friend, Corporal Davis, a tall farm boy from Ohio. "You finished that letter yet?" Davis asked, forcing a smile. "Not yet," John muttered. "Can't find the right words." Davis leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Don't wait too long. You never know when—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Because what awaited them before dawn would shatter every word left unwritten. A fragile promise. John stared at the page again, the ink blotting where his hand trembled. He thought of his mother's face, her warm eyes, the sound of her voice reading him stories when he was a boy. "Mom, if you don't hear from me again, promise you'll remember me as I was. Not as the soldier I had to become, but as your son. The boy who used to run barefoot through the cornfields. The boy who dreamed of building something instead of destroying it." He stopped, tears stinging his frozen cheeks. Around him, the silence deepened. The men were trying to sleep, but the truth was, none of them could. The stillness wasn't peace. It was the heavy breath before the storm. And John, with his letter half-written, knew that the storm was closer than anyone admitted. The enemy's shadow, near midnight, movement flickered along the ridgeline. Shadows shifted where no shadows should be. The sentry raised his rifle, signaling the others. Tension snapped through the unit like a live wire. John gripped both his rifle and his letter. His hands couldn't decide which mattered more, the weapon that could save his life or the words that might outlive him. The commander hissed, "Hold fire, wait!" The shadows vanished into the trees. Silence returned, but John felt it in his gut. Something was wrong. Because what crept toward them in the dark wasn't just the enemy. It was destiny itself. The weight of fear hours crawled by. Snow fell heavier, erasing footprints, burying the world in silence. John whispered to himself, clutching the letter, "You'll read this, Mom. I promise." "Somehow you'll read this," his voice cracked. Even as he said the words, he didn't believe them. Fear gnawed at him, not just fear of death, but of being forgotten, of vanishing into the cold earth with no one to know his truth. Nearby, Davis muttered a prayer. The commander paced. The men clutched their weapons like drowning men clinging to driftwood. John bent back to the letter. His pen scratched across the paper, desperate, rushed, as if racing against time itself. The first mortar landed without warning. The ground erupted, throwing snow and dirt into the air. John was hurled onto his back, his letter flying from his hands into the darkness. He scrambled for it, his heart pounding louder than the explosions. His fingers closed around the paper, now torn and stained. And as he clutched it to his chest, the second mortar fell closer. The night of silence was over. The storm had arrived. The storm breaks. The first mortars shattered the fragile silence of the valley. Explosions ripped through the frozen earth, snow and soil erupting in violent bursts. The men screamed as they dove for cover, their breaths ripped away by the shock waves. John Miller clutched his torn letter against his chest, his heart slamming like a drum. He could feel the paper trembling in his hands, as if it carried a life of its own. For a split second he thought of home, the warm kitchen, the sound of his mother's voice, and then the snow exploded again, dragging him back into the nightmare. The commander shouted over the chaos, "Positions! Hold the line!" The men scrambled into the trenches, rifles snapping into place. John shoved the letter into his jacket, his body moving on instinct. He fired into the darkness, the muzzle flashes revealing glimpses of shadowy figures rushing toward them. But the most terrifying part wasn't the enemy they could see. It was the truth they hadn't yet faced. Fear and fire. The battle raged, bullets slicing through the frozen night. John's ears rang from the deafening roar of rifles, his vision blurred by smoke and snow. Beside him, Corporal Davis fired furiously, shouting words John couldn't hear. Their rifles clattered empty, then reloaded in frantic rhythm. For every enemy that fell, more emerged from the darkness. They were endless, tireless, a tide of shadows. John's breath came in short, panicked bursts. Inside his mind, a voice whispered, "You're not going home. This is it. This is where it ends." But another voice rose, fiercer. "Not yet. Not until the letter is finished." A promise. Written in blood between volleys, John pulled the crumpled paper from his jacket. His fingers were numb, his vision shaking, but he forced his pen across the page. "Mum, if I can't make it back, I need you to know something. I'm not afraid of dying, not really. What scares me is that you'll never know how much I thought of you out here. Every night, every freezing hour, it was your voice that kept me going. If I fall, I want you to remember me not as a soldier in the snow, but as your son, who loved you more than anything." A shell burst nearby, scattering snow across the page. The ink smeared, but the words survived. John's grip tightened. He refused to let the letter die before he did. But finishing the letter would cost him more than he could imagine. Suspicion in the shadows as the battle slowed for a moment. John noticed something strange. A soldier a few yards down wasn't firing. Instead, he crouched low, glancing nervously toward the hills. John squinted. The man's rifle hung limp. His lips moved, whispering words John couldn't hear. Davis shouted, "John, eyes on the line." But John couldn't look away. A chilling thought crept into his mind. Was this soldier signaling? Could there be betrayal here in the freezing dark, just like the whispers in camp? He blinked and the man vanished into the smoke. But the secret of that missing soldier would return when it was too late. The wounded a scream tore through the din. One of the younger privates stumbled, clutching his stomach, blood soaking the snow beneath him. John rushed forward, dragging the boy behind cover. The soldier's eyes were wide, his breath shallow. Don't let me be forgotten," he whispered. John's throat tightened. He pressed the letter against his chest, as if sharing its promise with the dying boy. "You won't be." "I swear." The boy's eyes flickered shut. His body went still. John forced himself to stand, rage and grief surging in equal measure. He would not let the letter or their sacrifices be lost in the frozen night. Fire in the sky suddenly, flares streaked overhead, bathing the valley in harsh white light. The enemy swarmed like shadows given flesh, surging closer than ever. John fired until his rifle clicked empty. He grabbed more rounds, his hands fumbling, sweat freezing on his skin. Davis shouted, "We can't hold. They'll overrun us." The commander roared back, "We hold until the last man." John's stomach dropped. The order wasn't survival. It was a death sentence. But survival was no longer the mission. It was something far more desperate. The weight of memory. During a brief pause, John pressed the letter to his lips. His tears stained the page, freezing instantly in the bitter wind. "Mom, if this is my last night, please know that I was never alone. I carried you with me in every step, in every heartbeat. And even here, surrounded by fire and death, I still feel you near. That's what kept me alive this long. That's what gives me courage now." He folded the paper tightly, tucking it deep inside his jacket. It was more than words, it was his last piece of home. Encircled by dawn, the truth became undeniable. The unit was surrounded. The enemy controlled the hills, the road, the pass. Every path to safety was gone. The men's faces were pale, their eyes sunken. Davis whispered, "John, what do we do?" John's heart pounded. He thought of the letter, of his promise. He wanted to say, "We'll make it out." But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he looked at Davis and said, "We fight. We fight until we can't." The enemy charged again, closer than ever, bayonets glinting in the pale light. The commander shouted for a last stand. John raised his rifle. His torn letter pressed tight against his heart. And in that moment, as the shadows closed in, he realized the truth. The letter might outlive him, but only if someone found it. The question was, who would be left to carry it home? The last stand begins. The sun barely broke through the grey clouds, its weak light spilling across the battlefield. The American soldiers dug their boots deeper into the snow, clutching their rifles with white knuckles. They were surrounded. There would be no reinforcements, no escape routes, only the fight before them. John Miller crouched low, his breath visible in short bursts. His torn letter pressed against his chest, folded tight inside his jacket. Every time he felt its shape against his ribs, he remembered why he was still standing. The commander's voice rang out, "Hold steady. Every second we fight buys time for others to live." The men shouted in response, but the words carried more desperation than courage, because deep down they knew the battle was no longer about victory. It was about survival. Fire and fury, the enemy surged forward, bayonets flashing. The Americans fired volley after volley, rifles bucking against their shoulders. Snow exploded with each impact, smoke hanging thick in the air. John fired until his rifle jammed. His hands shook as he forced the bolt free, his breath coming in ragged gasps. All around him, comrades screamed, some in fury, others in agony. Davis fought at his side, his face smeared with ash and frost. "Keep firing, John. Don't stop." John obeyed, his body moving faster than his mind. He thought of Indiana, of cornfields in summer, of his mother's smile. "If I fall here, at least let my words make it home." The whisper of doubt between bursts of gunfire. John caught sight of the same soldier he had seen the night before, the one who vanished into the smoke. Now the man crouched low, his eyes darting nervously, his rifle still slung across his shoulder. John's stomach tightened. Why isn't he fighting? Why isn't he even trying? The man's lips moved as he glanced toward the hills. For a moment, John thought he saw him raise his hand as if signaling. Davis tugged at him. "Don't lose focus. The enemy's right here." But John couldn't ignore what he saw, because sometimes the deadliest enemy wears the same uniform as you. The wounded commander. A sudden explosion knocked the commander off his feet. He lay groaning in the snow, blood staining his coat. Panic spread instantly. Without orders, the line faltered. Soldiers shouted over one another, their rifles firing wildly into the smoke. John rushed to the commander's side. The older man's face was pale, his breath shallow. He grabbed John's sleeve. You must keep them steady. Don't let them break." John's throat tightened. He wasn't a leader. He was just 19, a boy who barely knew how to shave, but the commander's eyes burned with urgency. "I'll try," John whispered. But stepping into leadership meant carrying a weight he wasn't ready for. A voice in the chaos. John stood, his rifle raised, shouting over the gunfire. "Hold your ground! Don't let them through." The men looked at him, some with fear, others with desperate hope. He felt their eyes, their trust, or maybe their doubt, pressing down on him. Inside he was trembling. What if I fail them? What if I lead them to death? But then he thought of his letter. "Mom, if I don't make it, at least I tried. At least I didn't run." And somehow the words gave him strength. The betrayal confirmed moments later. John saw it again. The soldier who wouldn't fight. This time there was no mistake. The man waved a small flashlight toward the hills, a signal barely visible in the smoky dawn. John's blood ran cold. His suspicions were real. The man was betraying them, feeding their position to the enemy. He raised his rifle, his finger on the trigger. But he hesitated. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm about to kill a brother? Davis saw the hesitation. John, take the shot! Time slowed. John's heart pounded. He remembered the dying private's plea. Don't let me be forgotten. John fired. The man crumpled into the snow, his light extinguished. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then the enemy charged harder than ever. Because killing one traitor only proved there were more shadows hiding among them. Letters in the snow in a lull. John pulled the torn paper from his jacket again, desperate to finish what he had started. His pen scratched hurriedly. Mom, if you read this, it means I didn't come back. But please don't think I died afraid. I wasn't alone here. I had brothers beside me, and in my heart I carried home with me every step. That gave me strength even at the end. He folded the paper once more, sliding it deep into his coat. He whispered, It has to make it home. It has to. The encirclement tightens, the Americans were pushed back step by step, the circle of enemy fire closing tighter. Ammunition dwindled, their rifles nearly empty. Davis groaned, We can't hold them. We're finished. John clenched his jaw. Not finished, not yet. We fight until there's nothing left. But his words felt hollow even as he spoke them. The truth pressed harder with every second. They would not leave this valley alive. Because sometimes survival means more than living. It means leaving something behind. A flicker of hope. Suddenly a message crackled through the radio. Allied forces were moving to counterattack, but they needed time. Hours. The commander, barely conscious, rasped, Then we hold. We give them those hours. The men groaned, exhausted, terrified. But John raised his voice. You heard him. We hold. If we fall, others will fall with us. But if we stand, maybe someone lives. The men rallied, firing again, their shouts echoing across the snowy valley. John's heart surged with both pride and dread. He knew what it meant. They weren't fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for time. As the next wave of enemies charged, John pressed the letter hard against his chest. His voice cracked as he whispered to himself, If I don't make it, let this be my voice. And just as he lifted his rifle, a bullet struck him. He fell back into the snow, the letter slipping from his fingers. The world blurred. His vision dimmed. And as darkness closed in, he wondered one last thing. Would his words ever make it home? Darkness on the snow. John Miller lay in the snow, the cold pressing into his body like 1,000 knives. The letter had slipped from his hand, fluttering a few feet away, half buried in frost. His chest burned where the bullet had struck, every breath a struggle. Around him the battle raged on, gunfire, screams, explosions, but all he could focus on was that torn piece of paper. It held his final words, his last breath in ink. He stretched his hand toward it, fingers brushing the edge, but the snow swallowed it deeper. And in that moment, John realized that losing the letter would mean losing his only chance to be remembered. The fight without him, Corporal Davis, dragged John behind a wall of rubble, firing into the night. Stay with me, John! Don't you dare quit on me now! John's lips trembled. The letter. Don't let it be lost. Davis's eyes flicked to the snow where enemy boots stamped closer. Forget the letter. We need to survive. But John shook his head weakly. That is survival. For me? Davis cursed under his breath, torn between the friend bleeding out before him and the shadows closing in around them. Because in war, sometimes saving a life isn't as important as saving a story. The hidden enemy as Davis returned fire. John's blurry eyes caught sight of movement. A soldier within their line, creeping low, not firing. It wasn't the one John had shot before. This was someone else, another traitor. The letter's warning had been true. Others are among them. John tried to raise his rifle, but his strength failed. His voice cracked into the night. Davis, behind you. But his words were lost in the chaos. The shadow raised his weapon, not toward the enemy, but toward their commander. And the deadliest shot of the night was about to come from within. A last breath of courage, summoning the last of his strength, John pushed himself upright. His vision spun, but he clutched his rifle and pulled the trigger. The traitor dropped before he could fire. The effort stole the last of John's strength. He collapsed back into the snow, gasping. His body was failing, but a strange calm settled over him. He whispered, It's done, for now. The letter still lay in the snow, just out of reach. His heart screamed for it, even as his body betrayed him. The retreat by dawn, the American unit was nearly destroyed. Bodies littered the valley. Smoke curled into the grey sky, but they had held long enough. Reinforcements finally broke through, scattering the enemy. What remained of John's unit stumbled back, broken but alive. Davis searched desperately through the snow. He found John unconscious, barely breathing. And near him, half buried, was the letter. Davis picked it up, his hands trembling. He read the final lines smeared in blood and tears. His throat closed as the weight of the words sank in. Because sometimes a man's last breath lives longer, on paper than in his lungs. The final goodbye John was carried from the battlefield, his life fading with every step. His eyes fluttered open once more, locking on Davis. "The letter," he whispered. "Give it to her, promise me." Davis's eyes burned with tears. "I promise." A faint smile touched John's lips. For the first time that night, he looked at peace. Then his eyes closed and he was gone. Home again in words weeks later, in a quiet Indiana farmhouse, John's mother sat at the kitchen table. Her hands trembled as she opened a worn envelope. Inside was the letter, its ink smudged but legible, its words heavy with love and sorrow. Her tears fell across the page as she read her son's last thoughts. She pressed the paper to her chest, rocking gently as if holding him once more. John had not come home in body, but through the letter he had returned in spirit. And sometimes, the only way a soldier lives forever is through the words he leaves behind. Epilogue. The soldier's journal years later, the letter was preserved in a museum, displayed beneath glass. Visitors paused to read the fragile handwriting of a boy who had died in a forgotten war. Some wiped their eyes, some whispered prayers. But in that silent room, one truth remained clear. John Miller's voice had not been lost to the snow. His story lived on, and through his words the world remembered what history almost erased. Final cliffhanger. Everyone believed they knew the story of the Korean War. But John's letter revealed something far more haunting: hidden betrayals, unseen sacrifices, unspoken truths. And as long as his words were read, the world could never again call it forgotten. If John Miller's story touched you, don't let it fade into silence. Subscribe to The Soldier's Journal and join us as we uncover more forgotten voices of the Korean War. Like this video to keep these memories alive, and share it so others will never forget the sacrifices of those who never came home. Because history is not just battles, it's letters, it's voices, it's lives, and they deserve to be remembered.